I will pass it over to you, who's really needs no introduction, is an engineer on the Shiny team, been at our studio for, gosh, Barret, I want to say 4 or 5 years, maybe longer. And you have the stage.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Phil. Yeah, it's been, I think, just about 4 years now. San Diego was my first week. So
the San Diego conference or work week?
Yes. So I got to kind of coast through the conference, and then I started up at work week right afterwards.
Oh, the Monterey work week. Yeah, that was.
Yes, it was lots of fun.
What was the name of that? I can't remember the name of that place we stayed at.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, it was wild. All right, back to you.
It's just fun time. Anyways, yeah, thanks for having me. It's very exciting talk with you guys because you are the movers and shakers of the pharma world, and I want to make sure that you guys are set and ready to go with the latest tools. As Phil said, feel free to ask me any questions. I would be happy to be I don't want to say interrupted, that has a bad connotation, but let's have a conversation this next hour, because it's a small group. Let's be intimate while we can. If it's a big crowd, it makes it a little harder. So let's ask questions, and I'll try to answer as much as I can. But yeah, okay. Okay, let's dive into it. Let's see if I can get some screen sharing. I found a new setting in Keynote that I can possibly not destroy my whole computer, which will be great. So let's see if this works. Okay. Have a desktop with shinytest2 presentation.
We can see it. Looks good.
Looks good.
Awesome. And then I have Chrome and back to Keynote. And then this way I can also keep chat open. Yay. Cool. Yes. Okay, shinytest2. shinytest2 is regression testing for Shiny applications. It's just a way to try to keep your existing behavior. And we're going to kind of talk about that today. So is this talk for me? It's always kind of like a good one to see, right away if it is or isn't, or what background knowledge we need. And if you have no testing experience at all, because in the Shiny world, that is very plausible that you've never ran unit tests within R, I highly recommend checking out these 2 chapters of rpackages.org/tests, where Jenny Bryant and Hadley are talking about how to test in a package. And then there's also the Mastering Shiny book that Hadley has written up. And it talks about scaling testing. They're both chapters called testing, but they give a really much more verbose foundation as to what testing is and what is the goals and why are we to do it. If you're on the other extreme where you've already done Shiny test, not 2, but just Shiny test, and you're familiar with testthat, then we can kind of imagine that Shiny test script is inside a testthat script, and they just have a baby, and we get shinytest2. And to help you kind of do this automatically, we can execute the function shinytest2 migrate from shinytest, and that'll just try to automate all of your images and turn them over into snapshots for testthat. And I'll explain more about what snapshots are here in a bit. But the most important part is why use shinytest2. And it's because we want, the big deal is we want consistent app behavior over time. And this can be whether you're doing it solo or you're working with the team, but even more important that you're working with the team, because I know I'm not explaining everything that I'm aware of. And if we take that same stance, you'll not be explaining everything you're aware of. And so testing is our way to solidify at least actions that we want to be consistent. This involves critical features. If your $10,000 model breaks and is down, that's not good, and we don't want that for anyone. So at least hopefully we can catch this early with some tests. If you're making sweeping code changes, like in the Shiny repo, we switched from JavaScript to TypeScript. testing is very important, and shinytest2 or shinytest in that situation was invaluable. Updating dependencies, if you're updating your leaflet version or anything of the sort, the dplyr, like it's very important to have all those edge cases tested. And there's many more different situations, but those are the big ones, especially just consistent app behavior over time. So since this is shiny, let's do a demo. So let's look at the Palmer penguins, our new default data set. So this is just a small standard, application where we have a little bit of a sidebar, and we have a download button for a report at the end, and in the main panel, let's do an image and also a DT output. And if I switch, what species are displayed, I can get different interactions. And then when I'm all done, I can download the CSV, and I will get all the information for the penguins that are selected. And I think it's pretty neat. We also get how many penguins exist. So if I take away chin strap, we have 276 Palmer penguins total that are being displayed. So not a crazy app, but getting the point across of interactivity, sidebar, main panel, downloading pictures. Yeah, it's pretty good. So when I was going through that demo, we have kind of like this almost ad hoc testing. So when I was clicking some different species, we ended up having the 276 species that showed up. And that was a reactive value that showed up because I knew if I unchecked chin strap, then I could experiment and I could see that 276 shows up, and I could have these different behaviors come up. And it's kind of fun to do this and to see your reactivity work, but now I have to sit there and remember that when I uncheck chin strap, 276 needs to show up. And now this becomes difficult, and it's now some sort of behavior that I want to have as consistent over time. And so we should add this for testing. Because doing the manual testing over time, you will forget, and it is not consistent. Trust me, I'm having to test at least 150 applications for Shiny, and now having it automated, I can sleep a little bit better at night. So this is Shiny package. testthat. Let's get into testthat. So testthat package is unit testing for R. It is depended upon by almost every package in the R ecosystem, which is great because it's user-friendly and people love it. It allows you to do formal unit testing, such as expect equal, like I expect the number 4 to equal the number 4, or I expect the number of selected penguins to equal 276. We can also do this with expect snapshot file, and this is newer to testthat. Expect snapshot file is something where the Y value is stored in an external file. So you say, here is my temporary information, or my temporary file of knowledge that I'm wanting to assert, and then I can compare it to my existing snapshot file that is kind of hidden away given the name of what we're testing. And it's really neat. It's really nice when you have very complicated text or binary files like images, or very large JSON files which you don't want to clutter up your testing file. And the goals of testthat is fourfold. The first two I think are the most important, especially the first one is fewer bugs. If I make these assertions every time I push to GitHub or I test locally, takes like 30 seconds hopefully, we'll have fewer bugs all around because they're caught early and not late. Better code structure just will happen naturally, rather than doing giant holistic testing where you poke on the outside and hope everything goes down and comes back and it happens the right way. if you're testing individual components, you're going to break up your code. You're going to have better code structure because of it. And then also you can catch bugs sooner because you know that this component will be isolated. Easier restarts. This is useful because I know when I go to bed at night, I pretty much forget everything by the morning, and we want to like speed up that process so we don't have to wait 2 hours into the diving back down deep into the mental state. So you can have an easier restart for the day by just inserting like a failing expectation, or you can even insert like a expectation that will always fail, like expect true, and then you just write in false with a comment or something like that. So when you wake up in the morning next day, you can say test code, and then it'll hit that point and say error thrown, and then you'll have some message that you left, or possibly you have a test that you're wanting to achieve. And then robust code, kind of a combination of the fewer bugs and better code structure. If you have better code structure, in which leads to kind of this fewer bugs, you'll have very robust code because you'll be testing these individual components. And I just really like how testthat does it and tries to make it fun. You get little emojis or motivation if necessary, if you're failing many tests. And so these two packages are just awesome, and I really, really wanted to combine them. And so we made shinytest2. So we'll be testing our Shiny applications within testthat and performing these regression tests that way. So shinytest2 is a regression testing for Shiny applications. So I can't test plausible behavior. I can only test existing app behavior. And we're going to use shinytest2 to test that behavior for consistency over time. So if you perform a certain set of actions, we want these actions to have the same result every single time. And that's where this regression testing will come into. This will mainly be done using the function record test. Record test is interactive, and we can supply an app location or an app itself, and we can record a test right here, and it will intercept all of the Shiny interactivity that is happening. Not necessarily a JavaScript, things like if you open up a little drop down in your navigation bar, but if you navigate to a new page that Shiny is aware of, like navbar or navpills, things like that, or any like other input that you are allowed to set, record test will capture that. Same with the outputs being supplied. And my dad will laugh about this, that he made it into a Pharma presentation, but he always, when we were working with computers when I was younger, he said, if you have time to rest, you have time to save. And that was his way, because computers would just crash completely. They wouldn't just, auto save and then close. They would crash. Yeah, wise words, absolutely. And I kind of want to adjust that for today and just say, if you have time to rest, you have time to record a test, because recording is going to take you 30 seconds. And that's awesome compared to the 2 weeks of work possibly that you put in. And so if you make a new feature, record a test and have many, 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 many tests. That's perfectly fine. We don't need just one test to test everything. We can have many little tests to isolate different features. And it's very, very, yeah, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean, but I more want to record the test. And the other part of shinytest2 is when you record the test, it'll save some code, and this will use the app driver function. The app driver is similar to a Shiny driver from shinytest, but app driver will do all the new expectation methods that wrap around testthat, and it also has variant support. Variant in testthat is a way for you to have multiple different snapshot files without having them collide. In our case, this works really well for doing something like, I have a macOS 4.2 snapshot. I have a Linux 4.1 snapshot. I have a Windows 4.0 snapshot. And I can keep track of all of these different snapshots at the same time and they can be different, and they're not going to be colliding with each other or having different expectation results. And then the best part, why we are now shinytest2 and not just an updated version of shinytest, we are now built on Chromote, which wraps itself around your local Chromium installation or Chrome installation. So this is not Phantom.js anymore. Chrome is the latest. It's on your machine, so you have control over it on how updated and new it becomes. And so you can do the latest JavaScript, you can do the latest CSS. Bootstrap version 5 is now supported, whereas in Phantom it was not even able to show up. So yay, Chromote. And we also get debugging tools. There's a hint there at the bottom which says view live test app. And it's a really confusing statement that I can view a headless Chrome, but we are able to do that. And I think it's really, really neat and makes writing tests by hand not a black box experience. All right, so a bunch of cool stuff. Let's look at a demo. Whew, lots of stuff. All right, so I have, so I have the app, and let's go ahead and call shinytest2 record test, and I'm sitting in the applications working directory where I'm in Penguin start, which is where this is located at. And I'm going to hit record test. And shinytest2 record test will open your Chrome browser, even though I have, I'm able to run Shiny apps here. Because it is testing in Chrome, I figured that we should be recording in Chrome as well. This is asking about some hidden inputs right away. For the most part, I'm going to just ignore them. But if things like in Plotly, like if you click or hover or do things that have interactions and you want to record them, we can go ahead and record them. But for examples, I'm just going to say ignore. Awesome. So immediately right away, we get one thing that says app set window size to 844 by 1100. 1107. Great. So this app is 800 by 1100. Good. So we know the replay will also happen in the same window size. So that way it's not ever a situation of, oh, I recorded it in desktop mode and it replayed it in mobile mode. So it's a question from Bo. Is it only possible using Chrome? No, you can use any Chromium-based browser. Chromote brags that it's you could use Chromium app itself. You can use supposedly Edge and Opera and any other Chromium-based web browser. I am just familiar using it with Chrome because that's the default. Awesome. Let's go ahead and do the action that I was talking about, where I'm going to uncheck chin strap. And then we see the 276 Palmer penguins, and we also see the table update. And I'm going to say expect shiny values. Expect shiny values will get a JSON representation of all my inputs, outputs, and exports. We'll talk about exports in a second, but it's the inputs and outputs, which we're all familiar with. And then let's just say this is good. Oh, well, so a hint here says that I can control click or command click on an input or output object. So I'm going to command click on the 276, and it'll the code will show up saying app expect values of output penguin count. So I'm explicitly looking at that penguin count. And let's just go ahead and save and exit right here. So I'll just click save and exit. Awesome. So the test closes, and then the recording closes, and then it reruns the test so that all the snapshots are done immediately. And then everything is primed with values that are hopefully the exact same as to what we were doing right here. So let's actually go ahead and look at what was there. So this test folder wasn't there before the recording. There's a testthat.r, which is made to just basically test your Shiny application. So we'll just kind of gloss over that. And in this folder, there's a few things that is created. The under snaps folder, that is something that testthat does, where anything that you do in expect snapshot, it will save it in there. And if we look at that, we have the penguin start, because that was the name of the test that I did, and I had 2 JSON files. That's great. And let me actually go back to here to go through a little bit more. Setup.r is there. So if you have a larger Shiny application with an R folder, we will load your R folder. We will load as much of that Shiny support environment that we can as possible, so that when you run your tests, you can compare it against different variables that you have. And then let's look at the test that was recorded. When we recorded, we set the window size to 1100 by 800, which is great. Here, let me make this a little bit bigger. 1100 by 800. We then set the inputs by unchecking ginstrap, which is setting species to the Adeli and Gen2. Great. We then called expect values, which does all the inputs and outputs and exports. And then we did a specific one where we said expect values of output penguin count. Awesome. I'm able to click Run Tests button in the top right corner. Great. And then let's look at the snaps that were recorded. So the first expectation was expect values. So that would be this JSON file. And this will contain, there's a lot of data table things because it does all of these hidden inputs. So that's cool. And then we also have some more stuff, but it's very familiar with Shiny Test as if you've done that. And then I can see my penguin count here is 276, which is awesome. And then if I look at my JSON too, since I was only looking at output penguin count, then it's only going to be storing output penguin count. And I think that's great, because if you have, if you're looking at something very particular, we can ignore everything else that the app is aware of and only test that part. And I recommend doing that as much as you can to avoid false positives. That way, if like DT updates, you don't, get failures because DT decided to update. But that's also why we test. Let me close these guys. Great. So testing that 272, one thing that we should try to do, which I'll even admit I'm on the Shiny team and I didn't even know about the method. There's lots to learn about Shiny, but I think this is invaluable for testing, is a method called Shiny export test values. And export test values takes an expression very similar to like a key value, where each value is a different reactive expression. And so what we can do is I can say, I'm going to say count, and this will be my, what was my reactive that I have a reactive value of penguin count. Great. So I can say count is penguin count. And let's actually go back to my test and run the tests again. We should see some failures because I have a new exported value that is only available. Yes, it's similar function in the original Shiny test, because this export is built off of Shiny. It's very helpful. It's so useful with that. So let's actually look at, there should be a nice little Shiny, there we go, test that snapshot review. That's what I want. So I snapshot review it. And now in the export section, there's actually the import or input, output, and export. There's a new section of count, which we added, and it has the value of 276. And I think that's just great. So we'll go ahead and accept, and then we're done. So that JSON file is now updated. And if we look at JSON1 at the very bottom, we will now see this export count 276 score. Okay, so it's all not sunshine and rainbows. There are a little bit of limitations. So let's go through those because it's important to know your edges that you can tiptoe up to. Try to limit testing to your own objects. So I say this in a way of like, I can test the count of 276, and that's something that I own. But when we looked at our regular export, our expect values output, it had a bunch of DT output, and it wasn't necessarily too useful for us. So, if you can, try to pinpoint things that you're wanting to test rather than just blanket testing, and maybe DT will, crash your tests, and it's not something that you did. I just want to put this out of like a word of caution. Initial snapshot file contents must be verified by hand. It's not something like where you're saying expect my value A to equal 5. You're saying expect my current screenshot to be the same as my initial screenshot, but there's nothing to say that the initial screenshot is valid, or there's nothing to say the initial JSON is valid. It's just that I agree with myself. Doesn't mean that you're correct. So please verify those initial snapshot files by hand. But if you do have a comparison against a static value, that static value isn't going anywhere, and you kind of put it there yourself, so that's already verified by you that it should be that value. And then while it's very nice and a picture is worth 1,000 tests, try to minimize usage of expect screenshot unless you're okay with false positives. You cannot compare. Images themselves are not very robust. They're very, very brittle to things outside of Shiny and R even. So one thing, if you change your R version, most likely your plots will fail, and your plots will be a part of your screenshot, so therefore that will fail. If you update your R version, your system font, that will fail. If you update, because your browser will use the system font. If you update your operating system, like you develop on Mac and then you test on Linux, or those images aren't going to be the same. So there's lots of problems all around, and there's not much we can really do, because sometimes being off by 2 pixels is a failure, and sometimes being off by 20 is tolerable. So I can't make a rule that is generic for everyone. Yes, watch out, as Eric says, watch out for any reactive objects can't be coerced into JSON. That issue will still exist in this situation, but to get around it, you can just whitelist what values you do want back, and then that way you're not really, or you hopefully aren't going to be running into that situation. And then one that'll catch you every once in a while, if you're developing a package that has apps internally, be sure to call build and install before you test locally. I'm working on a way to get around this, but right now, since the Shiny session is run in a background R session, it does not inherit your locally sourced dev packages. And so you have to install them so that the background Shiny session can populate those packages. Let's see here. Yeah. So this is the end. This is, if you want to take a screenshot, this is the place to get a screenshot. shinytest2, it's regression testing for your Shiny applications. And, as we were joking before, if you have time to rest, you have time to record a test. Thanks, Dad. Or if you have time to lean, you have time to clean your code. That's even better. There's a bit.ly link for the repo with slides, and the website for shinytest2. There's getting started article. There's many other articles. We've done a really good job, and thank you, David Grangen, for supporting some of those from outside RStudio. And then also the links to the 2 chapters on testing for mastering Shiny and for R packages. Yeah, this is a big team effort, and appreciate the work of Shiny Test to lean on and to also build off of. So we have 20 minutes till the top of the hour. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Barrett. Very, very good stuff. Very, very good stuff. And I think something that's coming up a lot. I think a lot of this group especially has questions. I suspect Eric could probably ask some questions, but let's go ahead and open up the bridge here. And people have questions, we can tackle those here live with Barrett. Feel free to go off mute, or you can also write them in the chat box. Either way works.
I think this is the slide I was looking for.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I was going to ask about kind of like
a workflow slide. Yeah.
Yeah.
To try to understand sort of the, because I was trying to follow. Naturally, Barrett, you were moving quite quickly for me, but
yeah, I'm sorry.
Follow the overall process. Where do you put things? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very like, this blue box is hard enough to talk about, and I got to do 3 of them. Yeah, so the testing process, which is your R process, will launch a Chromote process and communicate with that. That Chrome, and then the testing process will also launch a Shiny R process in the background, but like there's no communication going forth. Then the testing process will tell Chromote, hey, go to this website, or click on this thing, or run this JavaScript, and then that will then communicate back to the Shiny through the WebSocket, and then the outputs will be updated, and Chrome can then capture them.
Got it.
I forgot actually to show one of the things I forgot last time, and I forgot this time, so that makes me sad. I want to show, if I was to make a app where if I'm just kind of looking at my test code that we did, right? Let's do this app driver new. And I think this is just so neat that if I do app$view, this will open up in Chrome. And this is actually what the Chromote process is seeing. And so I can debug my tests. So I'm a run app set inputs. This should uncheck Chinstrap. So if I run app set inputs, we see that it got updated, which is great. And then I can even call, instead of expect values, I could do app$get values, or we could say even get value. If I want to just say output is the penguin count. There's my 276. But this being able to view and even able to interact with it myself, these actions aren't being recorded, but this is what Chromote is seeing, and I can, call penguin count right now and get 152. So this is matching up, even though I didn't do the R code here.
Yeah, that helps understand how it's working. Interesting.
Stop and done.
Barrett, there's been a question in the chat box that says, can this workflow be incorporated into a CI/CD pipeline without the UI?
Absolutely. So good news for you. This morning, I wrote a PR, and have I merged it? Oh, how about we do live coding, confirm, squash and merge, and then that way it just shows up nice and easier. There is, similar to rlib actions, we can do a custom step, which is test app. And if you want a all-in-one CI/CD for GitHub Actions, you can copy one of these or just run the R command, use GitHub Action. And we do it for the 3 different setups that are pretty common. If you have an app with a description file, a app with an RN or you're having an app within a package. There's little subtle differences, and mainly it's either description and package or RN. And there's two different approaches. So yeah, I think this will, I use this within shinytest2, and works out quite well.
Can you put that in the chat box, Barret, please?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned GitHub Actions. It seems like it's establishing itself in a certain level of popularity among people that we teach workshops for and stuff. Is that what you use mostly for kicking off the CI/CD layer?
I have stopped using Travis completely.
Okay.
So I am full 100% GitHub Actions.
Yeah. Cool. Mm-hmm. And so you have you build tests, and before shinytest2, what were you mostly just using testthat as the test that we're kicking off for your changes?
For Shiny applications or for
anything really? Just curious what the workflow is like for you.
Yeah, for me it was just your standard package checking. So in a normal package in your tests folder, you would have your testthat, or you'd have your shinytest.r or things like that. And now I've tried to make everything about that shiny test to be inside your testthat. And I think this is just kind of fun to show just a little bit more of a power user situation. Yeah. In my testthat folder, I have a bunch of testing apps, and each of these have their own full testing suite. So this is a download app that, all it does is the UI is, just download a text, download a CSV, download a binary, link or button. That's all the app does. But in this themselves, it has its own testing script specifically for this app. And then if I back up even more, we can see the different snaps that were downloaded for the different files. And I think it's really nice that you can have the tests right next to your app, or you can even have your tests for your package. One of the things that I do is I actually write my application, or I produce my Shiny application in my test chunk.
Yeah.
And we can say I can make a new app driver, and I can call the app driver methods on it. Maybe you wouldn't want to call the expectations, but you could at least do certain things with that. And I think that's really nice, that you can just kind of maybe have a function to produce an app if you're doing a package development. Just, flavors, you can choose your own path.
Very cool. Any other questions about GitHub Actions or other things on your mind?
I have thoughts, as always. First, I love shinytest2. I'm already a huge fan of it, although I'm still early days of it. You probably know where I'm going with this, Barret, but in my previous explorations of shinytest, I would have apps that have the widgets like DT or some of these other HTML heavy widgets where the user was expected to input something or check if someone was in there. And I know that was a bit of an issue, getting those inputs set kind of dynamically. I don't know if there's been any progress on that front. Or what would you recommend as a workaround if there isn't?
So let's actually try doing the record test, and let's go ahead and record those hidden bindings since it's asking. And this is actually doing all of those, setting those input values to, the different pieces of information. I don't know. There are some things like if we do like JavaScript interactions, I don't want to say, I think DT does a decent job at some things, but I know things like leaflet, if you move the map, that may not actually do too much. If that's the case, I think we need to brush off our JavaScript, and hopefully we can do something in our app where we would do like app dollar run JS and custom code here, and hopefully you can do that.
Yeah.
It's not the best solution, obviously, but at least I'm trying to give you hooks that you can execute it.
Yeah, for some of these widgets like BT, it's becoming easier to do some of these interactions that I care most about, like selecting a row or selecting a cell and recording that. That's pretty well supported. There were some other widgets that are a little more esoteric, like Viz Network. I have a love-hate relationship with. It's been a very powerful widget, but working with that in Shiny can leave a little bit to be desired. So there's some that my workaround a few years ago was to detect if the app was running in quote unquote test mode. And if it was running in test mode, I actually put a hidden input in there that was shown to mimic like me clicking a node in the diagram with a select input. Whereas when the user goes to the app in the normal way, they won't see that input at all. That was extremely clunky and I'm not proud of it, but that was the only way I got around it.
That's actually a really good design pattern for situations that it's hard to replicate. So I think doing this design pattern actually for things like login screens, like, if get option shiny.test mode is true, then the username and password is admin123. Like that's what we'll accept. And that is wonderful for doing things like your login screens. Then also you can say, if I'm in testing mode, let's not ask the production database. Let's take static data that I have available locally, because we're trying to test the Shiny application, not necessarily if the data is working. So we should test against known data and known outputs to make sure that they're consistent. Because if the database updates, that's not your fault, and your test should not fail because of that. So doing something different because you're in test mode is, I'd say it's recommended.
Yeah, that's great. My last kind of question is kind of different, but maybe more for testthat itself, is what I did a few years ago is once I ran the Shiny test scripts, I actually outputted key objects and key screenshots into a report that I could give to the IT group and say, hey, here's the test that I ran on such and such day. You can see the screenshots, you can see the test passing. There's kind of like a way to appease quality. Long story, I won't get into more further of it. But is there any other like more built-in ways than testthat itself, or was Shiny test2 to kind of export the results of the test run into something that maybe either machine readable for another layer like R Markdown or anything like that you're aware of?
So there's two possible answers. One more technical, I don't know if it might be useful, but there is a return value from calling like test apps or shinytest2 test app, any of those testthat functions, they do return a data frame or a list of information about all the tests, and you can recreate information from there. Not saying that's an easy one to do, but you can get access to information there. The other one is, Phil had mentioned about it before, but David Grandin has produced Shiny Validator, and I get really excited about this package because it has all of the infrastructure and production validation testing like built in. Thank you, Harvey, for putting the link in there. Shiny Validator will have, I think, see if I can do this from memory. It'll have React log of your app initial values, which is great because that React log will help you display what's going on. It will do profviz of your app initialization, so to tell you, profile your code automatically for you. It will also uses underneath the hood shinytest2 to open up a recording, to make a recording for Shiny load test, and then it runs Shiny Cannon against that load test and displays the report in another tab. So we have Shiny Cannon, profviz, React log. I think it also does code coverage testing, which shinytest2 does not support code coverage because the Shiny session is in the background, so it's not recorded. But if you do have manual tests like testthat tests that you're doing, not manual tests, but automated testthat tests, that is covered by cover. So that's good. And then also he was at the Absalon conference, didn't have it in time because I had released just like the week prior. But he will also display all of the snapshots from your snaps folder for the Shiny test or testthat output for your app. And I think having code coverage, testthat output, your Shiny Canon, Shiny load test report, Profiz, and React log all in one browser, like that's awesome. That's automated. That's just crazy.
Yeah, it sounds like the combination of the Shiny Validator and shinytest2 are definitely worth the investment in learning to obviously make your application development much more robust, and something I'm definitely going to be pursuing, especially with this group as we configure more best practices that we all can follow.
Yes.
So Barret, I think that's actually was my question, is as this group is trying to help establish some best practices and common approaches across pharma that has many use cases for Shiny, but particularly here we're focusing in on submissions and locking things down and helping passing things over to regulatory bodies. Clearly, we know you're not from that space, but do you have any advice or thoughts or guidance for us as we try to do some of these things in the pharma community? Tests obviously being such a big part of that, but yeah, I think we're hoping to bring some of these best practices to the community as they approach these topics. So.
Yeah. So this is, I'm gonna give my ideal world if I could have like the setup of it. And so this would be, you need a completely reproducible environment, including packages. So either with renv and or Docker, because Docker will be your operating system. And so if you had renv and Docker, then at least the operating system is stable over time. Like next year, you can come back and it's still the exact same. With renv, your packages will still be the exact same. I know, it's the pain of having to recreate your renv snapshot all the time, but at least at submission time, then that way everyone looks at the exact same thing all the steps through. For testing, there's, I think, at least having something where when you do the test, you come in and your test is, I don't even care if you call set inputs, but if you just open up your test and just say expect values, like make a new app and call expect values, at least your initial things should all be consistent. Or if you know that if you say, set the drug to asthma meds, then you have this output. And Shannon, I think, is going to be demoing something about that at the RStudio conf. But I think just having something, at least a litmus test, it's still better than nothing. And then this could actually be run every time when the Docker starts. You could be like, oh, tests run and it's passed or failed, and then you're ready to start your Docker. I think that's at least a good start, but the big part is to try to make things reproducible over time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. The Docker is a little bit tricky one, I think, but the RF and testing, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe some CI/CD layering to that. Would that be something as part of the testing you'd recommend for the pharma space as well?
I also agree about. I think the CI/CD is like a replacement for Docker. When I run on GitHub Actions, I know that image is fairly consistent. It does change over time, but you could, if you wanted to, fix the name. But for the most part, that image is fixed over time, and it doesn't have my custom R profile. It doesn't have your custom R profile. It doesn't have my custom brew installations. Like, we know that at least the CI/CD is a consistent bubble that can be reproduced or hopefully reproduced. So I think the CI/CD is a wonderful idea.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. I've got one more minute here, and maybe another question if anyone has any they've been holding on to and they would like to ask. All right, I have one if nobody's going to go. So last chance, speak up.
I have more of just a recommendation, but as we think about doing these tests on apps that we deploy in our internal networks or internal firewalls, there are always times, at least in the apps I build, where I'm accessing something that's an internal resource, but that would not be available if I run it on GitHub Actions because their containers are not in my company's firewall. So it just underscores the importance of having some kind of mock data or mock objects kind of available so that you can run that with some, pretty close to real world example, inputs versus what internally we can run when we get access to our whole network. So that's just something to think about.
You could have a switch.
I think Eric sort of took the one last comment. It was somebody privately messaged me and said, one thing that our group could do that would be pretty valuable for the pharma ecosystem is if we could find a way of surfacing out common data structures for things like Shiny applications and other pharma workflows. We absolutely love penguins, but I wonder if there's a way that our team can find and house similar data sets that people use for sample, assets or data sets that they want to test on. But something for us to think about. One place we could start, Eric, is if you look at like R tables and some of the other packages, they've got some data sets built in already. Maybe it's the CDIS data, but we could start there.
Yeah, I was going to say either that or some of the other repos that were specific to some of these other initiatives from Fuse that I think are building some example data. But yeah, we should definitely do that.
Just for the notes here, I put a slide together with some of these right here. It's probably got about 10 different bullet points of different data sets that I've used. So anyway, something maybe our team can think about how to tackle. So with that, I don't want to keep you over, Barret, too much. And I want to thank everybody for coming to the May Shiny for Submissions Task Force meeting. Right now, we're focused on breaking into subgroups. We're going to send some communication out for that. So keep an eye out. We'll help establish some level of communication for those subgroups. And then we'll get together likely next in June. And maybe Harvey, we can see if your colleague maybe wants to give a talk on Shiny Validator since we heard so much about, about that package. But with that, I will let everybody have their afternoon back, and thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Barret.
Thanks, Barret.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barret.
Awesome stuff. See you later.
Yep, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Later.